Welcome back everyone to the part 3 of the fish modeling tutorial in Maya. This part's going to focus exclusively on texturing, so getting those UVs you made in the last part of the tutorial and bringing them into a 2D drawing tool like Photoshop or Gimp in this case. So first, you got to make sure your project is still set. Should be our fish demo. Set. We're going to open scene. I worked on a few of them, but the last one I did was the fish tutorial UV. Open. Okay, 6. So I have no textures on this guy. When we open the UV editor, object mode, we see that we have the fish UV'd with all the components. Should look a lot like that. Cool. Once we go into Gimp, you'll see one of the reasons why doing the fish sideways ended up being a little bit better. Cool. So in order to get this into a 2D software like Maya, or sorry, like Photoshop or Gimp or anything like that, you have to export these out. So how you do that, you select every part of the fish, because we want to export everything together. In this case, if you're doing multiple materials, then you want to just separate the parts into different UVs. But in this case, we're doing everything together to keep it light. So in the UV editor, which again should be on your side here, if it's not, not toolkit, UV editor. To get it on there, it's UV editor, and that'll pop up. One thing just to check before we take it out is just double checking. I'm pretty sure it's these, but just these two here, not the body, should be the outside of the eyes, just so we know what we're using here. Yeah, because these two are the inside of the eyes. You don't see them. Cool. So now everything's selected. Just go to Image, UV Snapshot. This menu is going to come up. Make sure you find a good place to place it. Typically, it goes to your images folder. That's okay. Fish UV is my old UV that I did in class. Yeah, let's export them there. We're going to call it fish video tutorial UV. Save that. Image format, we're going to switch it to PNG in case you have Maya IFF. You can also do JPEG, but we want PNG because I like some of the transparency issues or features. Your size, 2048 is something that I work with very often. You could do 1024 as well. It's more of a preference thing, how compact you want your textures. In this case, it's not, the model is not super detailed, so we don't really need all that resolution. But I'm going to leave it at 2048 for now. You won't notice much of a difference when you're exporting. Everything else should be kind of on. You definitely want the anti-alias lines just so you can really see it. If not, it might be kind of hard to see in the 2D software. And then the edge colors, you can change this from black to white to gray or whatever you want. White is good. I usually put a black background behind everything just to be able to work it better. Okay, so we're going to hit apply and close. And for me, it's been giving me an issue. I'm going to save it elsewhere. I'm going to do source images. Call it fish video tutorial. Actually, I think it's because I didn't have something selected. Go to object mode, select everything. Okay, it worked. Yeah, I just didn't have the object selected. Sometimes that happens. Cool. So once it's done, if you navigate to your fish tutorials, fish tutorial, and your images, you'll have their fish video tutorial. If you double click on the image, it'll look like this. Okay, so if it looks like this, then it's looking good. We're gonna open Gimp. Typically I work with Photoshop, but in this case, I'm using Gimp just to show an alternative. Similar tools and steps. I'm gonna basically approach Gimp in a Photoshop frame of mind. So we're gonna try to do the same thing on both. Okay, for this case, we're gonna open, and we're gonna go desktop, find where that file is. Images, fish, video tutorial UV, open. And at first it might be hard to see. So what you're gonna do is gonna hover on this side here. This should be your layers tab. You're gonna right click, new layer, call it BG for background, and hit OK. In the settings here, delete layers. You can, I was messing with it earlier, so my settings are a little bit different there. Just make sure this is black here, and you're just gonna create new layer. And the option here, fill with, should give you foreground color. You can kind of pick whatever you want. In this case, I want the black background so I can see the white outlines. So hit OK, and you won't see anything until you move it behind it. And now you'll see everything. Cool. I couldn't really figure out if Gimp had a way to lock these. Yeah, not sure how to lock it in Gimp. But in Photoshop, I typically just lock the layers, the top layer and the background layer, just so I don't mess with them. Last thing you want to do is like move something around to really mess up your whole project. But with Gimp, just be super careful. That's really the moral of the story. I'm also going to open the fish that we've been using for reference because that's where I'm going to pull the images from, and that's going to be under source images and fish. That's going to open a separate like tab. In Photoshop, it's going to be similar. You're going to have a separate thing. First thing we want to do is kind of remove that white background because we don't want to work with that. So you're going to look for the, here it's called fuzzy select tool. In Photoshop, it's called the magic wand tool, I think. Magic select tool or something like that. When you do that, just click the white. It should select the white. And then if you go to select invert, or in Photoshop, select inverse, it'll select the inverse of the white, aka the fish. So if you hit Control C for copy, and then go back to the other page that you're working on and hit Control V for paste, you should have pasted the fish with a few different things. Here it's gonna, with Gimp, it's a little bit different. Photoshop should just put in whatever layer you have. If you haven't created one, I would say so create a new layer first and then paste the fish onto that layer. In Gimp, it doesn't, it just kind of puts it temporarily there, and you have to say to new layer. So it does that there. And I'm probably taking the most difficult approach to putting this thing together, but it's kind of um, the way that I found that kind of works for me and what I'm used to, and it gives me a little bit of creative freedom if I want to change some parts individually. So first part I'm going to work with is going to be the body, then kind of like the head, the tail, and or the fins. Lastly, I'm going to do the eyes, and then the mouth is going to be the last part. And it'll all make sense later why. But instead of, I'm sure there's faster shortcut ways to duplicate these, but what I end up doing is just making a bunch of copies. So I just do duplicate layer. See, there's a shortcut now. So duplicate layer a bunch of times. And the reason is I'm going to use different parts of the fish for each, and instead of trying to like break it apart for each layer and then duplicating those, I just kind of move the fish around to where I need it, and then erase the parts that I don't need, and just go to the next one and do the same thing. And then I just kind of hide the bottom layers just to leave the top one that I'm working on. I go to the select tool, which is this little cross here. Also, I guess M is the shortcut for the move tool. And you can just move it around. So that's pretty cool. Alt and scroll, sorry, Control and scroll will give you a zoom in. Shift and scroll will give you left and right, and then scrolling will just give you up and down. So if you see my screen move, I'm just using the shortcuts for that. So the first one that I'm going to work in is this bottom body here, which we kind of already started. You know, the fish is already in that direction, so why not? So I'm going to move the fish here. To scale the fish, it's Shift T. That's the scale tool. Don't use these here because this is to like change the like the angle of it. Use the squares. The squares will give you like a, you have to hit shift or anything, it just does it. It gives you like a scaling capability that's uniform scaling. But I also want to see how I'm scaling it, so I'm going to turn the opacity down on the fish to like 30% or something, just so I can kind of see the highlights here. Just double check something. Yeah, just to see the highlights and just make it big enough where it kind of move it a bit. And the idea is to use as much as the original body in the top-down view here, you know, as much as possible right here, a little bit more, without getting the front or necessarily the back. And that gives a pretty good idea what's up. I'm gonna go closer this way. Yeah, I like that look there. And just hit enter. It'll place it there. Your opacity is still gonna be a little bit lower. You can take it lower if you really want to see what you're doing there. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the erase tool, which should be Shift E. Yeah, so Shift E for the erase tool, and then scroll in. Oops. Erase tool. And you'll see your eraser there. And I tend to put like a pretty hard erase, that way it like really gets rid of it. And basically I'm just getting rid of anything that goes into any other UV space. So this fin right here, we don't need that in the other UV, even though we could just kind of put another one on top of it. It's a quick enough fix that's not bothering me. I just make sure nothing's touching this side. It could get close, but as long as it's not going over the UV, it won't show up in the 3D model. So we're going to fix that top one. We're going to fix the eyeballs. If you want to be super clean about it, you can go all the way around. I'm just going to erase it real quick. Where there's nothing in the middle and nothing around it, so I can really see something, you know, what I'm working on there. We're going to fix this in a minute so that we don't have that in the 2D body of the fish. And same process in Photoshop, you just kind of move the layer around and erase the parts of the layer you don't need. This is the bottom fin, just clearing it out of the way there. And this guy here. Cool. So that part of the body is almost done. Before we finish with that, I want to get rid of this fin so that it's not on the actual side of the body. We're going to put that on one of these fins up here later. One of these guys up here. So to do that, you're just going to zoom in a little bit. You're going to go to the clone tool. There's a perspective clone tool, not that one. It's just the one with the little stamp looking tool. And for these guys, you have to hit control. You can see my cursor change. When you hit control, that negation sign goes away. And that's where you kind of place the marker, basically saying, hey, start looking over here. I'm going to clone whatever I started here on this side. So I'm going to look for something that's about the same distance. If you see, the fish kind of changes colors and layers horizontally. So I'm going to start kind of right here and just start painting. And what it does, it just copies over what's on the right side. Oops, let's undo that. Just find somewhere where it's, nice and comfortable. I'm gonna go a little bit lower for this one, maybe this way more. And then a little bit lower here. It's not looking too great over there. Let's get closer to it. Yeah, I'm liking that a lot better. Yeah, it's okay if it gets, it's never going to be perfect because this is not a perfect image to really work with. But it's close enough where it kind of goes away. And from a quick glance, you don't really notice it as much. Like I said, we don't need to worry about this because it's not bothering anybody. So just leave it there. It's not going to really mess with things. Since the other side of the body is almost identical to the top, I'm actually just going to copy this same layer. I'm going to call it fish body 1. And I'm going to copy it. So just right click, duplicate layer, and it'll have the other fish on there. Before I move on, I'm going to increase the opacity to 100%. And then I'm going to go back to fish body 1 copy and call it fish body 2. And then move it under, just for numerical sake. And then M to move to go to the move tool. Now, as long as you're in the, it's fish 1. I'm going to hide it real quick just so I can move fish body 2. So I'm just moving fish body 2 out of the way, turn it back on. And in fish body 2, I'm going to hit Shift T for transform tool. And I'm just going to hover over it and do layer. Don't do image anything, do layer. And we're going to do transform, flip horizontally. Bam. If you do image, it'll mess with the original image as well. So in this case, we're not going to do that. We're just going to do the layer itself. And we're just kind of putting it back to place, similar to the other one. Hit enter. And it's kind of there. I'm just going to move it a little bit further this way. Enter. Move tool. So yeah, the idea is that make sure everything's kind of encompassed, so it's lacking a little bit on the top there. So top's good. Here it's good. Here it's good, and good to go. It's not really interfering with the bottom one, so we're going to leave it as this. And we're going to go to the erase tool, Shift E for erase tool, and we're going to zoom in here and just delete the extra stuff from here. Make sure you're not in a different layer. It's not if it's not working for you, check your layers. We're in fish 2. Just erase the stuff that's going to bother the other UVs. In this case, that's not bothering. And you can leave the face over there. It's not going to bother anyone. Right here, you want to erase this part because it's into that one. Here's good. Zoom into the intersect. It's looking good. Everything else is good. So we're done with fish 2. Just bring the opacity back up to 100 and you're good to go. So next we're going to do the head. The head, we're going to turn on a new layer, select it, and then in the Shift M move tool, we're going to click it and, oops, selected the wrong one. Alright, this is just the M tool, no Shift. We're just going to move it up here. Shift T to transform. And we're going to bring the opacity down a lot. And using the squares, remember, don't use the corners. Use the squares. Kind of scale the fish up. And this is why when we were UVing, this is why we did things the way we did when it comes to like the gills and stuff like that. Because we wanted this shape here to kind of work in our favor. Like that. We wanted to have the gills in there. It makes it look a lot better when you have the gills in there. There's some fixing that we're going to have to do with the face, but otherwise, it's looking good. Yeah, just definitely want that inside there. This part, you'll see in a bit, we'll fix it a bit. So just hit enter, it's gonna put it on there. And for this one, the fix is gonna be really easy. You're gonna go over here to your lasso tool, free select tool, and you can just hold down and kind of draw around. And make sure you go between these, keep going, between that, and you're just gonna circle the fish. Once it goes to the select mode, you'll see it selected. You go to select, invert, and just hit delete. Bam, everything else that you don't need is being deleted. And then select none to get rid of it. And now there shouldn't be any other part of the fish that's bothering this shot. I think part of the tail kind of was out here. It won't, or way out here. It won't delete that because it's out of the working frame. But we can just, it'll get fixed once we flip it over later. Cool. So now that we're in here, now we have to fix some stuff. So the first thing we're going to fix is the kind of the eye right over the mouth area. We don't want the eye. We're actually going to use a different eye for the eye of fish, for the eye of the fish. So just go to the clone tool, same thing that we did with the scales over here. I'm going to want to copy somewhere near it. So remember, just hit Control over where you want to start, click it, and then you'll see like a reference there. And we're gonna just kind of draw it down here. Hit Control in a few different places so you can kind of copy it. One thing is for the clone tool, I'm gonna undo that. Select none. For the clone tool, you don't want such a hard edge. So I'm actually gonna tone it down to like 60%, and we're gonna do that again. So Control, and there. It looks a lot smoother when you do it this way. And we're just kind of drawing away the obvious parts here. And that way there's no eyeball. It just kind of looks like it's part of the face. We can kind of just move it around and select different parts. And once that's done there, you're looking good. Let's rename that to fish face left. Right click it, duplicate layer, and then Shift T layer, I guess, to move it. And then right click over it, layers, and transform, flip horizontally. And again, that's the part that was out of it. Just move it back. We don't need that part right now. Just kind of align the face. The UV is a little bit different from the left to the right, so just make sure you get it right. If you notice that you're hitting the eyeball, we can either fix it or move it or scale it. In this case, I'm just going to scale it since I have it here, and then move it back in place a bit. Yeah. Cool. Hit enter to place it. And I'm going to hit the erase tool. Shift E for the erase tool. I'm just going to erase this part here over the mouth because I don't want that bothering mouth. Cool. And it's not bothering each other. Those two, I'm going to call this fish face, right? I'm going to select these two, and the opacity, I want to bring it up to 100. Now it's a full color. Cool. For the, so that's the face. For the tail, we're going to turn on one of the other fish parts. Select the layer, Shift T to move it. That should also bring it up to the front. And then again, we're just going to scale. I want to bring that opacity down a lot so I can see the background. And that's a pretty good fit actually. Just scale it till you kind of encompass most of the fish there. And hit enter when you're happy with it. Let's bring the opacity back to 100. And select the free select tool. And just kind of draw around it here. We're going to use that same technique we used for the eyes, for the head earlier. In this case, it's not really bothering stuff, but you want to make it as clean as possible. So select invert and hit delete. It should delete the rest of the fish. And then select none to click out of it. Select out of it. Cool. We're going to call that fish tail. We're going to turn on another fish, select it, Shift T, brings it up to the front. We're going to do, let's do this tail, this fin right here. Bring down the opacity of it. And using the square, just scale everything uniformly. And again, just move it into place. It's super simple when you really think about what you're doing. It's just getting comfortable with the tools. And to me, that looks like it almost covers everything. And that looks good to me. Enter. Before I bring the opacity up, let me erase this part because it's hard to see in this area. Select tool, draw around it. Wait till that lights up so you know that's the end. And then select, invert, delete, and select none. We're going to call this back fin. And we're going to increase the opacity to 100 for that one. Going to turn on, I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 more layers, and I only have 3, so I'm going to duplicate some of these. Actually, the eyes I'm not going to need, so I'm going to do 2 more. Duplicate layer. Before I work on it, that way I don't have to figure out where it is, or import a new one or whatever. Turn another layer on. Select the layer, Shift T. And we're going to move the fish scale here. Bring the opacity down, make sure that's the same. Almost does it. Cool, that looks good to me. Enter. Select tool. Select, invert, delete, select, none. And we're going to increase the opacity to 100. Okay. Gonna turn on another one, select it. Let's call that bottom fin. You can see it. That's the bottom fin there. Select the next layer, Shift T. And this one's the dorsal fin. Let's bring that opacity down. Oops. That seems to kind of cover most of it. Yep. Enter. And select tool. Select around it. Select, invert, delete. Select, none. Bring the opacity back up. Like I said, very repetitive. Very, very repetitive work. And it probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but it will once we get it on the fish. For now, just follow until you get enough practice to understand what UVing really does. So for the side fins, it's a little bit more creative. You're actually going to use part of the fish. We're going to call this one before we move on dorsal. And it's good to name your layers, that way you know exactly like where you are, what's going on. Okay. So once you select the new one, Shift T, and we're gonna right click image, transform, no, not image, layer, transform, it's like it looks different, and transform it, flip horizontally. Shift T one more time, and this is why, so we can, actually, nope, we're not gonna do that. Undo, Shift T. Nope, just select the posted layer, paste the layer, and just Shift T, and we're gonna move it to place. I thought I moved it, but I didn't. So, I'm gonna scroll up. We are gonna have to turn it a little bit. So if you just kind of highlight over here, like where the triangle corners are, or where the square corners are, if you move past it, you can kind of see that tool come up, and that lets you tilt. So when you press the button outside of the, don't hit the square. The square is gonna make you move it weirdly. Just hover it past it. Once that little tool tip changes, you'll be able to adjust it. So once you adjust it to about there, just make it bigger. And that's going to be the side fin. Just make it cover the side fin there. Zooming in to see. That looks good to me. Select tool. Go around it. Oops, got too close there. Select none. Select invert. Delete. Select none. Cool. We're gonna leave it there. And for that one, we're gonna call it side fin 1. And we're actually gonna duplicate that one. Duplicate layer. Call it side fin 2. I like to keep 1 and 2 separate. And we're gonna scale the opacity back up in 1 and in 2. And then in fin 2, we're gonna Shift T to select it. And we're gonna move it. The fish is probably gonna be outside. It's okay. And just kind of put it into place. If you can't see, bring the opacity down so you see where you're placing it. Hit OK. Enter. And then just bring the opacity back up to 100. And that's good. That shouldn't be interfering with any other parts. So we just did all the fins. So next is the eyes and the mouth. So from the fish image, I actually don't love the eyeball. I'm just showing you guys what it looks like. I don't love how the eyeball looks in this fish. It's kind of weird and difficult to like actually work with. So I'm not going to use this eyeball. I found this picture on Google that I kind of like the shape of that eyeball better. So we're going to look for that and just go to Google fish eye. And something like this could work too if you want to use that instead of mine. But somewhere up here it's going to be this picture. Just download that picture and put it in your source images folder somewhere. And what I did is I just opened that in as well. So I did file, open. Mine I put it in a specific area, but just open that picture up. It's a very small picture. And what you want to do with that is you want to just zoom in a little bit. You can see it's low resolution, so it's not great, but it works. You go to this ellipse select tool, and holding shift, you'll make like a perfect circle. Actually, no, not in this software, I guess. Oh, control gives you a perfect circle. I would start somewhere here. Okay, undo. try to get as much of the circle as you want. And we can move it if you need to find somewhere where it's a little bit more fitting. Just kind of fit it around the fish eye as much as you can with getting as little of the gray as possible. And just hit Control C once you have it. Go back to your main picture, and we're actually just gonna Control V, and it's gonna again give you the option like how do you want to do it, and just hit it to new layer, Shift T to transform it, and carefully without scaling it, move it over to where the eyeball is. Okay, and we're going to take this opportunity to scale it up as well. And let me just bring it down a little bit. I want to try as much to use as much of the yellow as possible. Just it looks kind of nice in the final picture. And just hit enter when you're happy. Bring the opacity up. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And let's call this I1 and opacity 100. And I'm going to duplicate this layer as well. And then Shift T to select and move it down to the next section here. Bring the opacity down to line it up. Cool. And back to 100. Cool. And let's call that I2. And I'm actually going to use the same I layer. Just going to duplicate it. And I'm going to move, oops, what did I do? I guess I moved. I undid the move. Okay. Hit enter. Okay, now we're going to duplicate that. Duplicate layer. And the new duplicate layer, we're going to Shift T to move it. And we're actually going to move this over to where the back of the eyes are, which is back here. And no, we're not going to use the same eyeball texture in the back of it. We're actually going to use that clone tool that we used before, make this a little bit bigger. And we're going to copy some of that yellow texture and move it around. Clone tool. Actually, I'm going to move it. I don't like how far off it is from behind it. I want that somewhat centered. Alright, clone tool. And I'm going to scale the size from 51 down to like, yeah, like 20 something. That's good. And hit Control to select an area. And I'm going to start kind of copying some of these colors over. Trying to mask the pupil. Okay. And the point is that kind of looks like the fish internal skin or whatever, maybe some soft tissue. Better than having like a white eyeball like a human. I think that works a little bit better. Let's call it fish eye interior. And we're going to duplicate that one more time. And using the move tool, we're just going to move it over here. And with that, we're done with the parts of the fish that we have. The one part that we don't have is the mouth, right? I'm going to go down here. I'm going to delete these extra layers that I didn't really need. Delete layer, delete layer. I'm going to go all the way to the second to top and then create new layer and fill it with a transparency. Hit OK and call that mouth. And this one we're going to have to paint in because we don't have anything to go by. And if you follow the tutorial properly, you should have this shape for your mouth. And we're kind of looking at the mouth straight on. So this is where like the throat would be, and this is kind of like the roof of the mouth, the tongue area. We didn't model a tongue, so we don't have to worry about that. Just kind of, we're gonna give it like a mouth color. For me, I like red, make it a little bit somewhat realistic, but not like a super saturated red. Just do like a very like desaturated red, something like in this vein here. And you go to the brush tool, paintbrush. The size is in Gimp, it stays across every single tool, so we don't want this small of a paintbrush. 50 is good. And we're just gonna kind of paint around circles here. It's okay to be outside of the lines for once. And if you have like a Wacom tablet or something like that, which we have in the Davy lab, you'll be able to paint this a little bit more artistic than I can. I'm just using a mouse. We're going to desaturate a little bit more. And the idea is to go a little bit darker near the center because it's like the, you know, the throat and the roof of the mouth and all that stuff that doesn't really get seen too much. And I'm going to go darker and darker. Deeper I go, just different shades of red. And then once I kind of have a look like this, I'm going to go and actually get my previous colors and just kind of like tap them around. So you get a little variation in the skin that it's not so uniform. It's basically do the darker one around as well. Just kind of click my mouse a bunch of times and just kind of spot everything up. And scale the tool a little bit higher. Ooh, that's big. And just do that bright color again. Yeah, just kind of give it variation. Trying to create spots where it stays the same. Black, or darker. So it doesn't look so spotty. Then we're going to go back to the original idea here and just make it way smaller. I don't like the red, the really small ones. So I'm going to undo a few times. Let's do this medium color. Oops. Let's go back to that 50. And then go back to kind of doing the circle, the internal mouth here a little bit. A little brighter near the outside. And darker in the middle. Okay. I'm going to use the smudge tool and kind of warp these around a little bit. Dragging from the outside, from the inside out, just to blend some of these shades a little bit more. Yeah, liking that a lot better. Cool. So I'm happy with that. Everything's filled in and ready to go. So I'm going to select all of these that I just made. Yeah, just leave it as is. I'm going to make a new group. Call this diffuse. And we're going to put everything in there. That's part of the diffuse. If you haven't done so already, probably now's a good time to save. I'm saving it in my fish demo source images. I created a new folder and called it Gimp for the actual Gimp project. And I'm just going to leave it fish video tutorial texturing, not UV, so you can differentiate it. Hit save. And that's the actual Gimp project. So we want to make sure we save that. Oops. And the order which these kind of go in there, it's not super important. Try to see if there's a way to select multiple ones. Again, there probably is, but I'm not too experienced at Gimp, so I'm just gonna do this the hard way. This under here, maybe it's easier. Yeah, seems to be easier. And the idea is that once we have everything in one folder, alright, so we don't want to put the UVs because we want to be able to use the UVs for everything, and we don't want to put the background because we want to make sure we use the background. So this is the diffuse folder. You can tell it's a folder because it has this plus sign here. And we're going to just export that, right? We want to turn off the fish tutorial, the UVs. You can see the lines. If you see the lines, do not save that because those lines will pop up on your fish and it'll basically make it won't look good. So make sure you turn those off. And after you do that, hit File, Save As, Export As, and put it in your source images. If you didn't create a folder before, create a fish textures folder, and then call it, in my case, I'm calling it fish video tutorial texture. But I'm going to call it video tutorial diffuse, and hit export. Make sure, actually, I'm going to cancel that. Where it says here select file tab, hit plus, and look for PNG. You can also do JPEG if you want. Again, I prefer PNG. So look for PNG sequence and hit export. Fish video tutorial diffuse, PNG, export. Most of the standard settings are okay, so I just hit export. Okay, so once you save that out, we're going to create the different maps here before we move on. So from the diffuse, we're going to make everything else. So just right click the diffuse folder and do duplicate layer. I wish they had a different name for duplicate group, but it's the same. You can tell it's a different. And we're going to call this normal, or actually bump, because we're not doing a normal map here. And then you can right click, and I'm going to do let me see if I can max it. I'm going to do merge down. I think I only did one at a time. Alright, let's see if it just works. So select the bump group, and we're going to go to filters, or image. Yeah, well, let's try this. Image color management, and assign color profile. Nope. So okay, no, you can't do that. Okay, so once you duplicated these, you can't mess with you can't change the colors on the individual or the actual group. Um, so let's try that. So I did right click, merge layer group. Where'd it go? Okay, I'm gonna do it. Right click, and then hit merge layer group. And that makes just one photo. It basically flattens everything out. I'm gonna hide this one just so I don't mess with it. So in the bump, we're gonna select it and then go to colors and do hue and saturation. And we're going to desaturate the whole image, right? So that's gonna take away the color. With hue and saturation, we basically want to create the bump map. In bump maps, the black means, or the closer to black means the lower it is, like the closer to the object it is. White means elevated. So from negative to positive, dark to white, gray is kind of in the middle. So right now the scales are kind of off because right now the outside of the scale is going to be popping out and the inside of the scale is going to be pushing in. This is a hard to work with picture because of these top scales. We might just have to deal with it and get as close as we can to it. We can also try to like copy these up here for the hue and saturation, but it's going to mess with the colors too. So I'm just going to kind of leave it like that. I'm also going to go to colors and do color balance just to get some highlights a little bit. So in the shadows, that's not going to help. Colors. Sorry. Whoa. Why is this colored? Oh, sorry. We're going to go. Okay, so to change the bump from a color to a black and white image, just right click the bump, go to colors, hue and saturation, and just knock the saturation all the way down to 0, and then hit OK. And that's going to apply it. If you click off of it, it won't do it. I think no, it's good. On the diffuse, let's hide the diffuse. So now that the bump is desaturated, we're going to go back to colors, and we're going to do exposure. And as you can see, it's increasing the black level, decreasing it. Exposure, decreasing it, increasing it. We're gonna find some like middle gray. I like this middle gray. It's gonna give me some highlights and other stuff. I'm just gonna leave it like that. Hit OK, and we're gonna file, export as, and we're gonna call it fish video tutorial. But instead of diffuse, we're gonna call it normal. Export. Export. And I'm gonna try just those two maps now. You can make a third map, another black and white map that's for like reflections and things like that, and luminosity, and a bunch of things you can do with it. But we're gonna try just these two for now. So we're gonna select the whole fish, and instead of UV, one thing we should do is file, save as, and call it fish video tutorial textured. Save it, continue. I'm gonna delete all my history, and okay. So now I'm gonna select all the fish, And I'm going to assign new favorite material. You should only have Lambert. Don't mess with Lambert. That's the Maya basic standard one. I'm going to select and add a new material. Assign favorite material. I like blends because you can do a lot of stuff with it. And if you have deleted your history, you should only have fish body, fish shape, and blend 1. If you haven't deleted your history, you might have a bunch of stuff here. Just keep scrolling till you get to the end, or delete your history. So blend 1, first thing we're going to do is rename it. So I'll call it fish texture material. Okay. And there's a few things we want to plug in. I'm going to leave this a little bit smaller because we actually don't need it too much. The 3D view is going to be a lot more helpful. First thing we're going to do is hit 6 because we actually want to see the shaded view, which means with texture on it. We don't currently have a texture on it, so it's just going to be gray. So you can, at this point, select any of them. You don't have to select all of them because everything has, regardless which one you click, they all have the fish material because you assigned it already. So you can just select any of them. And I'm going to turn off this, so it's just a gray image there. And we're going to add our color map or diffuse. You're going to hit the little checkerboard next to it. It's going to open up a window. Hit File. It's going to turn kind of gray. And then hit the little folder. And under Fish Textures, you'll have Fish Video Tutorial Diffuse. Open. And the fish will have a material. And I see here that I think I left something on here. Look at Gimp. Yes. When I flattened it, I think it brought it up. See, that's why you want to check. Let's do this fish body. Shift E. I'm gonna go back and fix that before we move on. If yours did the same thing, all you have to do is just go back and find the part that's affected, clean it up. In this case, it's this part, and then the fish face. Right. And if you just erase whatever's affecting the other guy, it'll fix it. And it should have done the same thing for the bump map. No. But bump is going to be another issue because if you delete it, it's going to do that. And for the sake of time, we're just going to, in the bump map, we're just going to use the clone tool. Control. Okay, that fixes that top part, and let's fix this top part here. Okay, that kind of fixed it. So we're going to export those again. That way it overrides the original one. And just remember to hide the fish tutorial UVs. Let's just do this one since it's up. Export as, it's going to do bump, fish, video tutorial. Oh, I ended up calling normal, but okay, that's fine. Just should be bump. Hit export. File, do you want to replace it? Replace. Hit export. Gonna hide that one. Gonna show this one. Again, still the fish UVs should be off. File. Export as. Diffuse. Export. Replace. Export. And once those two are done, just go back in and you just have to hit reload and it'll bring in the new picture. And as you can see, this one did a pretty good job of bringing that along. The fish is very reflective right now, and this is part of why I didn't do that third map. With this particular texture, it acts kind of funky. I'll show you what I mean. Another thing I want to fix, at least in for the render, I want to have the UV editor so we can see full screen. You see these lines here that we kind of left when we were modeling. I'm going to show you a way to like soften this a little bit. It doesn't necessarily carry over to the game engine, but at least if you need like a higher quality render, you can do it. But you can see this is a lot better job as far as the face goes with the gills and everything. It'll look nicer once I get rid of those harsh lines. So select the fish again, and so we put the color map, and then we're going to do the bump map. So under bump mapping, select that, hit file, under the bump value, hit the in, and then hit the menu, and it should take you back there. Hit the normal button. Again, this should be called bump, but I called it normal. Hit open, and it'll look like craziness. So to fix that, you're gonna hit the out box here, and under bump depth, you can control that a little bit, and just kind of find a happy place where you get a little texture looking, but not so much pop. I like it there, and use the light to kind of shine you through the right way. Like I said, this is the mouth. It's hard to see right now, but if you were to animate it with an open mouth or something, that's kind of like why we wanted a little bit of that. It kind of looks like it has lipstick on, but you can change whatever color inside you want. I like red. It's a little cartoony. Alright, so our two maps are in. The other map I wanted to show you is the specular map, and that helps you like manually put in like how much reflectivity the fish has. But I don't want to go back and forth trying to, it helps you highlight, like if you don't want like the face to like reflect at all, you can make it so the face doesn't reflect at all, but the scales do. It gives you a little bit more control in that sense, but to me the fish it's wet and it's kind of shiny everywhere, so I'd rather just manually control it with this little roll off here. So I want very minimal reflection, maybe a little bit more. And in this case, black is no reflection, white is a lot of reflection, so somewhere near the middle is fine. I'm okay with that. Just click off of it so you can really see it. I'm gonna turn these off real quick. Control A, view. Okay, so I can see the whole fish. It's looking good. So now to fix some of those edges that are a little harsh, at least in Maya, just so it looks a little bit better, you hover over the fish, go to edge mode, and the first edge we want to see, so go to see a little bit better, I'm going to hit 5 so we get rid of the texture, and hit object mode and click off. And you can really see the biggest problem we have is, one, this really harsh edge on the side here. You may or may not have this based on how you model it, but if you do, I'm going to show you how to get rid of it. And then we have the one that separates the face, and then pretty much all the ones in the face, causing a lot of issues. Same thing with the eyeballs. Everything's like super um, edged. So how we soften those, right? We're going to hit edge mode, and we're going to start with this one. Just double click it to select that edge. I must also do this one and this one. I'm going to go back to the front one in a minute because that's going to give us issues. Since we have these weird, these terminal vertices here, we're going to have to double click the rest of them. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Just make sure everything's selected in rings. And you're going to, after you select those, you're going to hold shift, right click, soften harden edges, and hit soften edge. And when you hit off of it, object select, you can see it already softened it a little bit. Right. We're gonna do the same thing to the mouth. Just double click the top of the mouth, shift, double click the bottom of the mouth, shift, right click, soften edges. and it's looking a little bit better. Now we gotta get rid of these like longer lines. These we're just gonna go from, let's see, object. Alright, these long ones, let's take care of those big ones. So this one, let's go from the front of the fish to the back of the fish. Same thing with the one on the other side of it. Front of the fish to the back of the fish. And it shouldn't select these because it has the weird terminals. We're going to make sure we select them manually. We're going to shift, right click, soften, soften edge. That's a lot better. There's also this hard center line here. Gonna get rid of that. And that one only starts at the where the side of the face starts. So I'm gonna only select those. You don't want to go overboard with this. Sometimes it makes your model look really weird. So just do that. A lot better. We're gonna do this eyeball crease that starts from the side of the face here to the front. I'm gonna select this long one to this one. I'm gonna do the same thing. Select it, yeah. So from this one to this one. Soften edge. I'll do this one to this one. This one to this one. Oops. These two. Shift, soften, soften edge. Do this, do this, this, do this. These actually need it all the way through. So I'm going to do it all the way through. I'm going to soften edge. You can see the fish is looking a lot better now. A lot better. And you kind of just go back between object mode and edge mode and find the object's edge that look kind of rough and fix those up. I'm going to do the inside of the mouth here, but you don't want to do these hard edges. And the reason why is, this is why. Don't do this, just look up for a minute. If I soften these edges, when I click off of it, the fish kind of looks like it lost its lip, but there's some weird lighting issues going on. That's what I was saying. Don't do those. Don't do hard edges that like show like where the model is, the edges of the model. Don't do that. Okay. Once you select the last few edges, shift, right click, soften, soften edge. Go back to object mode, and that should be done. Hit 6 to go back to your shaded view, and your fish should be textured. You can do the same thing to the eyeball, just hit edge, actually, object mode, edge, select all the edges, and soften. And you should be done. Make sure you hit save, and done.